Thanks for watching one of our messages today. My name is Caleb Combs, and I'm the gathering pastor here at the River, and we would love to connect with you. An easy way to do that is text River Connect to 97000, or you can visit our website, theriverchurch.cc, for more information. If you'd like to financially contribute and give to the River Church, you can text an amount to 84321, or again visit our website and click the Giving tab. We hope you enjoy the message today.
We left off last week with Jesus praying in the garden. You remember? Soldiers came and we made it pretty clear he gave himself to them. They did not take him. He gave himself to them. He gave himself for us, the Bible teaches. So keep that in mind as we go this morning. And as we go, I'm going to do my best to just give you the events as they happened. I am not normally nervous as I preach, but I am nervous when I come to something like this because I just want him to say what he wants to say, okay? So I don't have a lot to add. We're going to see what really just happened, okay? And we're going to look at that together. But first I want to pray. I want to ask the Lord to bless our time together. Lord, we love you. And we see this morning so clearly that you love us. And I don't understand it, but I am so incredibly grateful for your love for us, Lord. You didn't give up on us. You gave yourself up for us. And we thank you. I pray that this morning you would speak. I pray you would move. I pray you would work in our hearts. Help us to see you this morning and hear you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. In John chapter 15, verse 13, Jesus said that the greatest display of love that could ever be shown from one person to another is that someone would be willing to lay down their life voluntarily for someone else. That's an incredible thing to think about. But Romans chapter 5, verse 8 tells us that God proved that he loved you. Do you know how God proved that he loved you? He proved that he loved you by laying down his life voluntarily for you and for me. But Romans 5:8, it goes further than that because it says God went even further, infinitely further, and says he did this for us when we hated him. When we did not even love him, he died for us. The greatest example of love that has ever been shown, but God went infinitely beyond that and did it for us when we cursed him, when we denied him. And so this morning, we are looking at this. We're looking at God laying down his life willingly for us. So we go back to the garden, okay, where we left off last week. And what we see there in John chapter 18, again, we see that Jesus allowed himself to be taken. He was bound, he was led away, and we find that he was led to a man named Annas, who was the former high priest. Now, do you remember what happened when Jesus was taken by the soldiers? All of his disciples left. They all ran, okay? But we are told that at some point, Simon Peter and the Apostle John, at some point, they turned around and they began to follow from a distance. Okay? So, sort of secretly, Matthew 26, verse 58 says, "But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end." Now, we're told as we keep reading that the Apostle John is known by the high priest and his staff and his servants. And so John is allowed to come into the courtyard where they take Jesus. But Peter is sort of left out in the cold, okay? He's standing outside and he's kind of like, can I come in too? So John actually goes up to the servant that's keeping the door and says, hey, can we let him in too? And it's here that we read this in verse 17. The servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, hey, wait a minute. I know you. Aren't you one of this man's disciples? It's here we see the first of the three of Peter's denials of Jesus. And right there, Peter lies and says, I am not. I'm not his disciple. Now, as a reminder, Jesus said this was going to happen, didn't he? Matthew 26:34, Jesus said, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter swore up and down that this would never happen. He would never deny the Lord. But here it is, the first of the 3. Now it says there, verse 18, now the servants and officers who had made a fire of coals stood there, for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. And Peter stood there with them, warming himself. It says, verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus about his disciples and his doctrine. So the high priest begins to question Jesus. He wants to know about his teaching, and he wants to know about his followers. We read this in verse 20. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Why do you ask me? Go, ask those who have heard me what I've said to them. They know what I said. It says in verse 22, and when he said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil, but if well, why do you strike me? It's at this point that Annas, the former high priest, realizes he's not getting anywhere, so he's going to send him to Caiaphas. We read that in verse 24. Annas sent him bound to the current high priest, Caiaphas. Caiaphas is his son-in-law. Now, as Annas sends Jesus away, something happens. Go back to where Peter is warming himself by the fire. Watch this, verse 25. Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, hey, you are also one of his disciples, aren't you? What does Peter do? He denies it and said, I'm not. You got the wrong guy. Verse 26, one of the servants then of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you? I was in the garden. I saw you with him. Verse 27, Peter then denied it again. We read in Matthew 26, verse 70, that Peter began to actually call down curses on himself. I am cursed if I know that man. I swear an oath that I don't know that man. Let me be accursed if I've ever met him. This is how Peter responded. It says there in verse 27, and immediately the rooster crowed. So this is the 3rd time that Peter denies Jesus, and we learn from Luke's gospel that as the words are coming out of Peter's mouth, Jesus is being led past him at the same moment. Watch this. We see this in Luke. It says, immediately while he was speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly. Can you imagine what it would have been like to lock eyes with Jesus in that moment? Oh man, Peter wept bitterly. But it all happened just as Jesus said it would. Now, Jesus is now brought to Caiaphas. In this midnight trial, okay, it's about midnight, being brought to Caiaphas, and somehow everything is ready for a trial. There's witnesses, there's people, all kinds of stuff. It's almost like they knew it was going to happen, almost like it had been set up. Matthew chapter 26, I'm going to begin reading at verse 59. It says, now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council, they sought false testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none, meaning no accusations that would stick. But at last, 2 false witnesses came forward and said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple and to build it in 3 days. Verse 62, and the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is it that these men testify against you? Verse 63, Jesus says, but Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God, which I think is funny. It's like saying, I put you under oath by yourself, right? I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Verse 64, Jesus said to him, it is as you've said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest, when he heard this, he tore his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you've heard his blasphemy. So here, the high priest is rightly understanding that Jesus is claiming to be God. And so they cried, blasphemy. Verse 66, Caiaphas asks, well, what do you think? He asks the people that just so happened to be there at midnight to try Jesus, right? And they answered and said, he is deserving of death. Then they spit in his face. You understand, this was how they voted. One by one, they would come by and they would spit. They would look into Jesus' eyes and then spit into his face to condemn him to death. So one by one, each person spit into the face of Jesus. It says, and then they spat in his face and beat him. And others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you? So this religious group here in the middle of the night begin to spit into the face of Jesus and then to punch him and laugh at him as they do so. Luke 22, verse 63 says that they actually blindfolded Jesus before they began this process so that he cannot see who punches them, which is why they said, prophesy to us. Verse 63 there, it says, now the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him, and having blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, prophesy, who is the one who struck you? And with many other things, they blasphemously spoke against him. You know, when you can't see a punch coming, you can't react against it. So here they are, they've blindfolded him. And then one by one, they take turns and they punch him and they laugh at him. Job chapter 16, verse 10 gives us a glimpse into this scene. It says, they gape at me with their mouth. They strike me reproachfully on the cheek. They gather together against me. One by one blows into the face from these religious leaders. And once they are all exhausted with their fun, they lead Jesus away to the Roman official whose name is Pilate. Now, before we go further, you got to understand Pilate's role in all of this. It's very important. He plays a pivotal role in all of this. Pilate is a Roman ruler. He rules in the province there in Israel, and Israel was broken up into various provinces. His rule is over Jerusalem specifically. So he is a Roman ruler who is ruling in the area of Jerusalem for Rome, keeping order, taxes and etc. Now, there are many records that show that Pilate was kind of on thin ice, as it were. He had made some poor decisions, bad leadership decisions, a number of insurrections, a number of uprisings had caused problems for Rome, and so he's warned, you've got one chance, buddy. You better keep Jerusalem under control. Now keep that in mind as we go, because it makes sense why he does, it explains sort of why he does what he does. One last note before we look at verse 28. The reason that they bring Jesus to Pilate, to Rome, is because they want Jesus killed. And they cannot put anyone to death. The reason that they cannot put anyone to death is because Rome has taken that power away from them. They will say that it's not, they can't do it because of their law, but that's not true. Rome has taken the power, the authority to put people to death away from them, and so they need Rome to kill Jesus. So they bring Jesus to Pilate for this purpose. All right, John chapter 18, verse 28 it says, they led Jesus from Caiaphas, the Jewish high priest, to the Roman praetorium. And it was early morning. And what may be the most hypocritical thing written here, we read, but they themselves did not go in to the praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So here they are illegally trying a man, spitting into his face, mercilessly beating and mocking him, but we're not going to go into the Roman province so that we can still celebrate the Passover feast. Oh, by the way, this is the Passover lamb in front of us being slaughtered. So, Pilate goes out to them. They won't come in, so he has to go out to them. Verse 29, he says, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" Now, they have nothing. Even their false accusers don't agree on their testimony. We were told that. They have nothing but their hatred for Jesus. Jesus said that in John 15, verse 25. He says, "This all happened that it might be fulfilled, which is written in the law. They hated me without a cause." They hate him. They have no reason to. It's the wickedness of their own hearts. So they have nothing, but it's why Matthew 27, verse 1 says that they actually had to plot or scheme against Jesus to put him to death. They've got nothing else, and so that's why they answer what they answer in verse 30. They answered Pilate and said to him, "If he wasn't an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you." That's not an answer, and Pilate knows that. He knows that they're just stirring up trouble. So verse 31, Pilate said to him, No. You take him and judge him according to your law. In other words, I'm not getting involved in this. Deal with it yourself. Then they reply, they know their answers, they know what they're supposed to say, so they reply, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." See how they blamed it on the law? No, they know it's not lawful according to Rome. We can't do it. It's at this point that the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, tells us that they begin in rapid-fire succession to accuse Jesus, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Now, they know what they're doing because the three accusations here are a threat to Rome. They know what they're doing. They're trying to make sure that Pilate, takes this seriously. So the first thing that they say is that Jesus, is perverting the nation, which means he is trying to get us, the Jews, to rise up against you, Rome. You better deal with him because you might have a revolt on your hands. That gets Pilate's attention. Second thing is he's telling us not to pay taxes to Caesar. That's going to get Rome's attention because that's what Rome wanted. They gobbled up land and then took taxes. It supported all of it, right? But the last thing is, hey, he's a king. And we know Rome does not allow any other kings. In fact, Caesar is king, right? In fact, most people in that area had to, every year, take a pinch of incense and burn it on the altar and say, "Caesar is Lord." The Jews were the only exception to this because they were willing to be slaughtered rather than do that. So he's saying, listen, Pilate, you got to deal with this guy. He says he's a king, and you can't allow a king. So Pilate now must go to Jesus about this, verse 33. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, notice what he asks, "Are you a king? Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replies to Pilate, verse 34, Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." And then Pilate's tragic and now infamous reply, I wish we had time to go into it, but verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Our world's asking that question every day, aren't they? What is truth? And it says, when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all." It's at this point, we read in the other Gospels, that the chief priests and the leaders, they begin to incite the crowd to rapidly begin to accuse Jesus of anything they can think of. Luke 23, verse 5 says, at this, they were the more fierce, saying, he stirs up the people and teaching all throughout Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. I mean, they're just rapid fire, trying anything they can get on Jesus. And they're worried Pilate's just going to dismiss the whole thing. And so they begin to do this, to accuse him feverishly of anything they can think of. It's at this point that Jesus becomes silent. He does not answer their accusations. Mark 15:3 says, "And the chief priests accused him of many things, but he answered nothing." That's a whole sermon in and of itself. You ever been accused? He answered, "Nothing." Then Pilate asked him again, saying, "Do you answer nothing? See how many things they testify against you." But Jesus still answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. We read it just a few moments ago, Isaiah 53. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. This was not about defending himself. This was not about what is true and what is not true. He was going to the cross for you and I, and nothing was going to stop that. It's at this point, Pilate heard a word. He heard a word that he realized could maybe get him out of all of this. It was the word Galilee. They said he's teaching all over the place, beginning from Galilee and onward, and all of a sudden Pilate realizes there's a way to offload this problem. If this man is from Galilee, he's outside of my jurisdiction. I can push him to the person that is over Galilee. So Luke 23, verse 6 says, when Pilate heard Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. As soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. He's like, all right, problem solved. Herod's problem. Now, Herod is one wicked dude, and you're going to see that in the way that he treats Jesus. Luke 23, verse 8, when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, but not because he wanted to worship Jesus. Look what it says. For he had desired for a long time to see him because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. So Herod, wicked individual, his life is defined by his excess of pleasure. He just wants to be entertained by Jesus, like Jesus is some kind of magician. But Jesus does no miracle for him. Jesus performs no magic trick for him. So verse 9, he begins to question him with many words, but Jesus answers him nothing. I think it's interesting that Jesus did not even talk to Herod. He doesn't say a word to Herod. Verse 10, the chief priests and scribes clearly followed Jesus all the way to Herod, and they stood and vehemently start to accuse Jesus again. So the religious leaders, right, they start doing this. But because Herod doesn't get his magic show, and because Jesus wouldn't say anything in his own defense, verse 11, then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt. We're not told all that happened there, but with contempt, and they mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. By the way, at this point, you got to understand, Jesus' face would have been so severely swollen, probably couldn't have hardly, been able to see, right? From the blindfold and the punching in the face. So they mocked Jesus as a king, and they put a purple robe on him again as a mockery, and then they send him back to Pilate, and now it's Pilate's problem again. We read in Matthew 27:15 that Pilate has an idea that he hopes will appease the crowd and the religious leaders. Let's see what that is, verse 15. Now, at the feast, Passover is what it's referring to, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. So Pilate, as a goodwill offering from Rome towards the Jews, would give them a prisoner. He would say, who do you want me to release to you? And they would give him a name, and then he would release that prisoner to them. It was a goodwill offering, kept peace between the two of them, said, hey, we're on friendly terms. But Pilate is going to use it this time. And he's not going to give them their choice. He's going to make them pick between just two people, right? Just two people. Verse 16. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ? Now, the word that is used to describe Barabbas is not a good word. The word notorious means that he is marked in a bad way. What it means, is that he is known for his wickedness. This man is known for his evil, for what he has done to people. According to Luke 23:19, he was known for murder. The word that is used of him is that he is a taker in every sense of the word. It's not just that he steals. He takes life. He takes innocence. He takes everything. This man is vile. And the reason that Pilate chooses him is because of how bad he is. I mean, Pilate reaches into the very depths of the dungeon to pull this guy out. And it's the equivalent of Pilate saying, listen, I can release to you either Jesus or Charles Manson. That's the choice that's in front of them. And Pilate's thinking, with only these two men as the options, they're never going to choose Barabbas. Never in a million years would they want that guy free again. Pilate thinks he's got him. They assumed he assumed that they would immediately recoil at the idea of Barabbas being loose again, and then by default have to choose Jesus. Now what's interesting is that Barabbas' full name is actually Jesus Barabbas. Did you know that? The choice that day was between two Jesuses. In Pilate's mind, there's no way they would choose Barabbas. He's got them, he thinks, because Matthew 27:18 says he knew that they handed Jesus over because of envy. There was nothing on him. Now, while this is going on, something happens. Really interesting. Verse 19 tells us that Pilate's wife sends him a text message. Okay? Matthew 27:19, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him saying, have nothing to do with that just man. She's talking about Jesus. Have nothing to do with that innocent man. She says, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. She calls Jesus innocent. She tells Pilate, don't have anything to do with this guy. Don't have anything to do with his condemnation. Keep that in mind as we go, because you'll see it in the way that Pilate responds. He knows it's serious. Look at Matthew 27, verse 20. But the chief priests and elders, what happens? They persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they began to say Barabbas. This is called herd mentality. The leaders, interesting, the leaders persuade the people to ask for things that are destructive in their society. Isn't this interesting? It will be harmful to them. Verse 22, Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? They all said to him, let him be crucified. They said it over and over, let him be crucified. Then the governor said, why? What evil has he done? You see, Pilate's trying to get out of this. He knows what his wife has said. He's trying to get out of this situation, but they're not letting him out. So he says, why? What evil has he done? But they cried out all the more. They just overlapping each other. Let him be crucified. Let him be crucified. Let him be crucified. Verse 24, when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising. That's the very thing he can't have, right? He's been warned. He took water and he washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this, what does he say? Just person. The same word his wife used. He says, I'm innocent now of the blood of this just person, of this innocent man. He says, you see to it. So, washing his hands, he's trying to say, I've had nothing to do with this. But unfortunately for Pilate, it doesn't work like that. He does not free Jesus here because he's trying to save his own skin. He doesn't want an uprising and one is brewing. He doesn't want trouble and it's there. And he can't just make this go away. He's kind of stuck. So he just denies the responsibility of it and tries to move forward. The multitude at this point, verse 25, says this. All the people answered and said, his blood be upon us and on our children. And in saying this, they don't realize what they're saying, but what they're saying is true. They speak for every person in all of history. His blood is on every single one of our hands. It's on every single one of us. You and me and every person who has ever been born, we all bear the responsibility of the death of the Son of God, of Jesus Christ. And we bear that responsibility because it was my sin that put him there, and it was your sin that put him there. His blood is on our hands. His blood is on our head. Now, after they say this, Pilate does release Barabbas. Can you imagine? Barabbas probably thought, well, there's no chance this is happening, and gets released. And then Pilate gives the order for Jesus to be taken away and scourged. Luke 23:23. But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified. And the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested, and he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison. But he delivered Jesus to their will. And their will was for Jesus to die. So Pilate gives the order for the process of crucifixion to begin, and it always began with scourging. John chapter 19. Such simple words here, but so much behind them. We read, "So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him." Scourging was developed by the Romans. It was an unimaginably brutal form of punishment. A person was stripped of their clothing. They were chained by their hands to a post in the ground. The Roman soldiers then took what was called a flagellum, or a cat of nine tails. It was a whip with 9 strands of leather. Each strand had pieces of bone and metal and glass embedded into it. And one by one, Roman soldiers laid this whip across the back of Jesus. With each strike, the bone and the metal and the glass would embed into the skin. And then, to release the whip, they pulled. And when they did, whatever was attached came free. Whatever was embedded was ripped loose. Rome gave 39 lashes. The sentence was always 40, but they held back 1. They said it was mercy. Many people did not make it through scourging. Many people died midway through. They lost consciousness because of blood and because of shock to the body, and died right there on the spot. Jesus' back and sides would not have had just red marks, okay? That's a really sanitized version of what happened. His back, this is no exaggeration, would have been ribbons. You would have seen through to his bones and organs and muscle. His bones would have been broken and exposed. He would have been bleeding everywhere. As it wrapped around the ribs, if he fell over the other way, it was across the chest. Jesus was absolutely torn to shreds through this process. He would have begun to swell and to bruise in every place they struck him. And this was just the beginning of the crucifixion process, because next came the cross. Now, in Jesus' case, they took all of this a step further than normal. The soldiers made a special mockery of Jesus, a special mockery of our Lord, this supposed king. After scourging him, he is barely standing there, his body in total shock, trembling and bleeding, slipping in and out of consciousness, no doubt. And in verse 2, it says, the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it into his head. The thorns that were used there, I saw them a couple of years ago in Israel. They're 2.5 inches long. They grow on a tree there that you can't even get close to it, but you just imagine taking this and twisting it into a crown. And now you imagine that his face, from the beatings, right, would have been so swollen that they would have pushed this into his head. And then it says, verse 2, then they put on him a purple robe, probably the same robe that Herod had put on him, but this time they put it on his shredded and bleeding back. Matthew 27, verse 29 says that they put a reed in his right hand, like a king's scepter. And then they began to salute to him and bow to him mockingly. Mark chapter 15, verse 19 says that then they took the reed out of his hand and they began to strike him on the head over and over, and then to spit into his face. And bowing the knee, they worshiped him, laughing. Isaiah 50, verse 6 tells us that not only was he whipped and struck on the head, it says, I gave my back to those who struck me and my cheeks to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. So they pulled chunks of his beard out of his face as they do these things. Back in John 19:3, we read that they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And then they, too, began to strike him with their hands. Keep in mind, these are Roman soldiers. These are not slight people. Mark 15 says that for this beating, they actually called together the whole garrison. The word that's used there, typically, it's called a Roman spirit, typically describe 400 to 600 soldiers. Doesn't mean that they called over that many, but it does mean that they were calling to the other soldiers to come over and have their fun and to take their turns. And so one by one, Roman soldiers were taking turns punching Jesus over and over, spitting into his face, laughing at him, striking him on the head. It says after this that Pilate made one last attempt to try to spare Jesus from death. John 19:4, it says that Pilate went out again to the crowd, and this time he said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him." And Pilate is hoping that when they see what has been done to Jesus, when they see how badly he's been beaten, how torn, how swollen, how much he's bleeding, how he's been treated, they're hoping they'll look and they'll say, okay, that's enough. That's what Pilate's hoping for. Look at verse 5. Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." In that statement, Pilate said something that's more profound than he realized. For the one that was standing before them was God and also man. Here Jesus is displaying none of his divinity. He is, as Philippians chapter 2, he has been found in appearance as a man. He has humbled himself to the point of death, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. Even to the point of death, he's humbled himself. So Pilate says to the crowd that day, and he says to us this morning, "Behold the man." And it's a call for us this morning to look at what God did for us. Look what God became for you and I. Can you see him this morning? Look what our King, look what our Savior, look what our Creator became for us. Look what he did. God stands before you as a man broken and torn and beaten and crushed by his own people, the very people he came to rescue and save. Behold, the Son of God who loves us, who became this for us to save us. Now listen, when the crowd saw him, the Bible tells us they gasped. The word that's used literally means that some probably fainted at the sight of this. Isaiah 52 verse 4 says, "Just as many were astonished at you." They were overwhelmed by his appearance. It says, "So his visage," or his appearance, "was marred or disfigured more than that of any man, and his form more than the sons of men." And the reason that his appearance was disfigured more than that of any person that has ever been in history is because he is also God. He is infinitely higher than we are, and so came infinitely lower than we ever have. No one's ever become so low because no one's ever been so far above as God is. But what this tells us is that for his appearance, to look at him, he was severely disfigured by what has happened to him. And again, Pilate is hoping that this will be enough to appease the crowd. And it might have been for the crowd, but it is certainly not for the religious leaders. Look at verse 6. "Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out," and then we read in the other Gospels, "stirred the crowd, saying, 'Crucify him, crucify him.'" It's at this point that Pilate realizes that his efforts to release Jesus are not going to work. In fact, John 19:12 tells us, we read that the crowd starts to say that if he lets Jesus go, he is an enemy to Caesar. In other words, he is promoting a different king besides Caesar. And so it's at that point that we read John 19:16, "Then he delivered him to them to be crucified." Those two little words there, "to them," are very important because he was delivered to us to be crucified. We read in Mark that before he is led away, they tear that robe off of his back. No doubt had begun to dry on whatever part of his back or his body it could. They ripped it from his shoulders, and then led him away to be crucified. John 19:17 says, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. The place of the skull, or Golgotha, was the highest point in Jerusalem. And when it says that he bore his cross, it means that he had to put that rough hewn lumber cross on that back, and he had to carry that through the streets of Jerusalem and then up a hill to the highest point in the region. We know from the other Gospels that this task was too much for Jesus' physical body by this point. He would have been barely conscious after all that happened, and yet he's carrying this cross. And we know at some point along the route, Jesus collapses under the weight of the cross, which would have been in excess of 200 to 300 pounds. And a man named Simon of Cyrene is pulled out of the crowd and made to carry the cross with Jesus the remainder of the way. And we don't have time to go into that, but Simon helped Jesus carry his cross up that hill. Now, Golgotha was at the corner of 3 different trade routes, and it was intentionally placed there so that everybody who walked by could see the crucified on that hill. And it was a warning to every person, don't mess with Rome. We don't play around. That's what crucifixion on that hill said. Now, what's interesting is that it's called the place of a skull because until recently, we were there just a few years ago, until recently, the natural rock formation was the face of a skull. You could see the eyes and the nose and the mouth. I mean, it was literally the side of this mountain looked like the face of a skull. It's been defaced since because of the scriptures. So it's been defaced. It's pretty hard to see it now that it's a place of a skull, but that's what it looked like, and that's what you would have seen in that day. There's photos of it. If you look online, you can see it before it was defaced. But it's there, verse 18, that they crucified him and 2 others with him. Criminals, one on one side and one on the other, and Jesus in the center. Now, like scourging, crucifixion was an extremely brutal Roman invention. The condemning process was brutal, but crucifixion, they were stripped of their clothing. The crosses made of that hewn lumber, they were laid on the ground. The prisoner was laid down on the cross, and then their arms were stretched out with ropes. They put ropes around their hands, and soldiers pulled from either side to make sure their arms were as far apart as possible, while somebody else drove a nail right through the 2 bones here in the wrist and at the base of the hand. It went into both hands and into the wood. Same thing happened with the foot, except it was a little bit more tricky because you had to lay one foot over the other. And a single nail was driven between both feet, right at the base of the shin and at the top of the foot, in between those bones, through the ankle, into both feet, and into the wood. And then, of course, the cross would be flipped over onto the ground, and the weight of the cross would fall onto the person that was crucified there as they hammered over the nails to make sure that while the person was hanging there, the nails did not pull loose under the weight of the body. From there, the cross would be flipped back over, and it would be pulled into place. The base was positioned in front of a hole, and as they pulled it up into place, the center post would fall 3 feet into the hole, and that is typically where the shoulders and arms were completely dislocated, as they did not give under the weight of the body slamming down into that hole. And then began the real issue. The real issue of crucifixion was breathing. Immediately, the crucified would find out that they could not breathe. And that's because of the position of their bodies on the cross. Their arms being stretched out as they were, now dislocated. Their legs had a slight bend in them intentionally. You'll see why in just a moment. Would have supported the body, but the body would slump down under the weight of it, compressing the diaphragm. The crucified would immediately start to panic because they could not breathe. They would eventually realize that if they, with all their effort, pushed up, their backs against that wood, if they pushed up, they could open their diaphragm to allow the ability to take a breath of air. So if you saw people crucified, what you would see is that struggle, that effort to breathe. Every person crucified, you would watch them up, down, up, down, up, down, in order to breathe. Eventually, it became a question of exhaustion. They would suffocate because they could not any longer physically push themselves up to get air. Crucified people did not die from the nails in their hands or feet, did not die from the lashes on their back, or even from dehydration. They died from suffocation as a result of extreme exhaustion. In fact, they would give the crucified water for them to drink to keep this process going. It was designed, and many said, it was a perfect form of torture and sentencing for killing somebody. It was literally a question of how long could they do it. The need to breathe versus the ability to exert that energy. And it was only a matter of time before they couldn't do it anymore. Have you ever wondered why they came to the soldiers to break their legs at the end of the day? It was because of this. They came to the soldiers to break their legs because when you break their legs, they can no longer push up and get air. And so the whole process is over immediately. They suffocate to death. They did not want their bodies on the cross overnight, and so they broke the legs of the two criminals, and then they came to Jesus, and he had already died, so they did not break his legs, which of course is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. But Jesus, when they came to him, he was already dead, and John chapter 19, verse 28 says it. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, and man, we could look at so much more here, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. And a vessel of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. Jesus is crucified, and we could spend, like I said, many hours talking about all the things that he said and did, even from the cross. But this morning, I just want you to see, before we close up our time together, I want you to see what happened with these two criminals. It's so important that you see it. We're told in the Gospels that many people walked past Jesus laughing at him while he's on the cross, mocking him, spitting at him, saying he saved others, himself he cannot save. We're told that the soldiers mocked Jesus relentlessly. We're even told that the two criminals who were crucified with him mocked him. Matthew 27, verse 44 says, even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. But what I want you to see this morning, so important, is that as time went on, something happened in the heart of one of those men. Luke tells us the story, Luke 23:39. Then one of the criminals who were hanged blasphemed Jesus, and said, if you are the Christ, save yourself and us. He mocks Jesus. I thought you were the Savior. Why don't you save us? But something has happened in the other man. Look at verse 40. It says, but the other, answering him, rebuked him, saying, do you not even fear God, seeing you are under the same condemnation, and we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. And then it says, he said to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Please notice, they were both mocking Jesus at the beginning of this. But now, as one starts to blaspheme and mock Jesus again, the other one stops him. And I want you to think about this for a minute. Why? What happened? You see, this man now sees Jesus very differently than he did just a few hours before. From what he says, we see that now he sees Jesus as innocent, right? What did he say? This man has done nothing wrong. He knows Jesus is hanging there innocent. He's done nothing wrong. Can't say that about any person in history, can you? Can't say that about anybody. Anybody but God. This man is innocent. He has done nothing wrong. The second thing he says is he sees himself as guilty and deserving judgment. He says, listen, we are hanging here because we deserve to be, but not him. We are getting what we deserve, but not him. You see, his view of who Jesus is, it's changing, right? And then he looks to Jesus, and in his request, what do we see? He now considers Jesus Lord. The word means master. The word means I belong to you. Here this man is, struggling to breathe. pushes up. Lord. And every breath, to get the words out, remember me when you enter your kingdom. And then he sees Jesus as a king. He says, you're a king. You have a kingdom. Very different, right, from who he thought Jesus to be. Now, then he says, he understands, right? This is about the afterlife. This is not about right now. He knows that they're going to die. They're all going to die. And so he understands he's asking Jesus to help him in the afterlife, in the heavenly kingdom. And then lastly, he sees that Jesus is able to save him after he dies. He looks at Jesus and he says, remember me. And it's so much more than just, to remember his name. The word means look to me. It means don't forget about me. Listen, we're all crossing over. We're all going to take our last breath today. But Jesus, I know you're a king with a kingdom, and you can look at me and save me for all eternity. That's what he's asking Jesus to do, is to save him. And I'm amazed because he knows Jesus will. He asks him. He knows Jesus doesn't hate him. So he asks him. And what does Jesus say to him in verse 43? Jesus does not say, I'm sorry, I cannot save you. You failed too much. You've done too much. You've gone too far. Jesus does not say, I cannot save you. You were just mocking me a few hours ago. That can't be forgiven. Jesus doesn't say that. He doesn't say, I'm sorry, I can't remember you because you've not atoned for what you've done, or you've not been baptized, or you've not been to church. Jesus says to him, assuredly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. He says, I just want you to picture this. Jesus pushes up to say it. And he says, be sure of this. Be sure of this fact. We are all going to die. Be sure of this fact. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Family, can I ask you, are you sure about this? He says, be sure. Be certain about this. You're going to be with me. Not purgatory first until you atone for it, till someone gets you out of it. Today, you will be with me. Notice also that the promise is not today, you'll be in heaven. Jesus didn't say that. Today, you'll be with me. Today, you'll be in heaven. Today, you'll enter paradise. What does he say? It's so much better. Today, you will be with me. You will be with me in paradise. This is the offer. This is what this is all about. It is not religion, it is not church, it is not money, it is not programs, it is not behavior. It is you and him forever, and that is why he came. It is why he died. So that you will know this today. You might take your last breath. Will you be with him in paradise? That's the question. Are you sure of it? Because that is why he came. It is nothing else. This is why he came. If you do not have a relationship with Jesus Christ this morning, I want you to think about for a moment, what changed with this guy? How did this guy come to know Christ in that moment? He didn't go to church. He didn't give money. He didn't get baptized. He didn't have any time to make anything right. He didn't fix anything. He didn't do anything. His view of who Jesus was and what Jesus was doing, that is what changed. And it happened in the space of a few moments. And he looked to Jesus and he asked him to rescue him. And you can do the same thing. And you can do it right now. Why did he come? Why did he come? He came to give his life for you. Listen, until just a few moments before this, Jesus was just a joke. And to that other criminal, he was just a joke. Is he a joke to you? to just laugh off his claims, to just ignore it? Will you look him into the face and say, you saved others, save yourself? Or will you look and say, save me? Save me. Look to me. Rescue me. The Bible says that if you can hear his voice today, today is the day of salvation. Why did he do it? He came to give his life because he loves us. If you want to receive Christ, let's do it right now. Got to humble yourself. Let's pray. Lord, we love you. We thank you for your mercy. We thank you for your kindness. We thank you for your grace. We thank you, Lord, for coming and dying for us. Lord, I pray for any person here this morning or watching that does not yet have a relationship with you. Is that you? Are you the one that he is talking to this morning? Has Jesus just been a joke? Has it all just been a thing that you have ignored or excused or even laughed off? But this morning, your view of who he is and what he did has changed. Will you turn to him this morning? He did not refuse that criminal, and he will not refuse you. Will you admit your need? That man saw his need. He saw who Jesus was. He saw himself as condemned. He saw himself as needing to be saved. Will you? Right now, will you admit your need to the Lord? He is listening to you, just as he was listening to that man that day. Will you admit that you are a sinner? Tell him that now. Will you admit that you need salvation? Ask him to save you. Humble yourself before him. Ask him to save you. He will be faithful to do it. Lord, we love you. We praise you and thank you for coming, for not giving up on us, for loving us. We love you, Lord. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.